Hello and welcome to Viewpoint Podcast. I'm your host Ajay Mathur, presenting yet another enlightening and, of course, academic driven podcast featuring my eminent guest who has been an academician, a journalist, an author, and, of course, has been on the editorial side as a think tank in the UAE. He has been an Indian journalist who has made an indelible mark in reshaping the destiny of Indian narrative all across the Gulf region. He's pursuing two books which are making a mark: Rural Conflict and Transformation, and of course, an Indian journalist recollections in the Gulf region. Both the books have got a lot of content, a lot of stuff that can change the narrative both in India and in the Gulf region. Let's welcome my guest at the Viewpoint Podcast, Ehtesham Shahid. Welcome to the show, Ehtesham.
Thank you. Good to hear from you, Mr. Mathur.
Thank you for giving me your time all the way from UAE. Let's start with you have been an Indian journalist. You've worked with various publications like Indian Express in India. You're a product of Aligarh Muslim University and have done masters in English literature, besides doing a diploma in journalism from Mumbai. How has been your journey, Ehtesham, and how come you made forays into the Gulf region? Can you share your initial journey, please?
Yes, definitely. It's been very eventful, if I were to choose one word. And if you look at it from the timeline perspective, I landed in the Gulf region literally 15 days after the 9/11 happened, which was a very definitive moment as far as the Gulf region's modern political history is concerned. So that meant the whole region had to go through a period of realization, whether that being extremism. There were a lot of things that were riding on the decisions, the choices they made, and as we know, it's a very conflict-hit region. There are different conflicts in different parts of the Middle East. Some of them close to getting resolved. Most of them nowhere close to getting resolved. So that evolution in the last 20 years is what I have witnessed here. And when you are in the media, you are looking at things differently. You kind of understand the nuances of the changes that are taking place. And different countries are going through different trajectories as far as those changes are concerned. And then if you look at it as an academician, then the perspective slightly changes. You take a more long-term approach. So those are the two interesting perspectives I've had in this region. And I must confess, they have both been very, very exciting indeed.
Well, you have been an editor of the various publications all out there in UAE, especially with the Khalid Times, Al Arabia, Arab News, Trends Magazine. You've been a business editor of the Trends Magazine, representing at the World Economic Forum at Davos and at Jakarta. Now, what is the present economic scenario? We are seeing a lot of recession happening the world across. There's a economic snail down, and there's a completely, all across Europe and US, the technologies are falling. The statesmanship is saying a different narrative. We're in the war-torn zone. We're on the brink of a war at any point of time, with the Russia and Ukraine going crazy. From the Gulf point of view, and how do you see Indian perspective, especially when India has assumed the G20 presidentship just recently?
Yeah. So before I come to the Indian perspective, the Gulf region, which basically constitutes the six Gulf Cooperation Council countries, the Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Oman, Qatar, and Kuwait. Uh, there are similarities. So there are two dichotomies in the Middle East. One, of course, is that despite being a very monolithic, if I can choose that word, a region with the same language, with the same religion, with pretty much the same weather, there are countries that are chalk and cheese when it comes to economic situations. So you would find very happening and booming oil-driven economies such as Saudi Arabia and the UAE and a few more, Kuwait and Qatar being other examples. But at the same time, you also have countries like Syria and Yemen. Those are very very sore points, very conflict driven, and their economies are, as you can imagine, struggling to survive. And Egypt is a slightly different example. Now, I'm very loosely categorizing all of them under the Middle East because there are different definitions of the Middle East. It's, there are people who call it West Asia rather than the Middle East. They don't agree with that kind of geographical boundary. But to sum up the whole argument, it's not a very homogeneous region. Now, every country comes with its own challenges, with its own opportunities, its own advantages in many ways, and most of those advantages are related to the oil windfall that they've had in the last 50, 60, 70 years. So it depends on how they are tackling their opportunities, how they are basically benefiting from the opportunities, and how they are tackling the challenges. Now, again, they are at different curves, at different levels. So you'll have to really go country by country to look at these sets of opportunities and challenges. Now, and they have also evolved. So it's not the same. So Saudi Arabia of today is very different from the Saudi Arabia that I saw in the year 2000, 2001, 2002. Now there is a lot of change, and similarly, other GCC countries have also drastically changed in the last, even from an economic perspective. The good thing from an Indian perspective is that the diaspora, the Indian diaspora which exists in this part of the world, has evolved very dramatically because it used to be very blue collar driven remittance interdependence, and in India's energy interdependence with this region and the remittance that used to go from here were kind of driving relationships. But it has evolved from then on. The Indian diaspora is far widespread now. There are more doctors and engineers than blue collar workers here. Probably not more than them, but still the balance is there. So India has come to play a very, very important role in the evolution of the GCC countries and broader Middle East in the last 2 decades, if I may sum up like that. And I see that role getting enhanced. G20 leadership being one of them. I see a greater role for India. It looked as if there was a reluctance to engage, and you also have other challenges such as balancing regional equations such as relations with Saudi Arabia, and how do you balance that with Iran and things like that. And India has done recently a good job of doing that. But going forward, it is going to be I see brighter prospects of more engagement, greater economic cooperation on both sides, and it's unfolding at various levels, including some very interesting multilateral levels as well.
Absolutely, because at the leadership front also, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's and the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia's bonhomie and chemistry is setting up a new mega trend in the Saudi-Indo relationship, both in trade and commerce, and of course in technology transfers. What's your perspective
Absolutely.
on that?
Yeah, that has it has. I mean, most of these leadership, this bonhomie that you're talking about, it has got a lot to do with how the relationship between countries evolve. And once you have that green signal and a push from the top leadership, things start to take shape much quicker than they usually do when there is reluctance or misunderstanding. So there is nothing of that sort. Of course, there is push and pull. None of India's relationships with any country in this region is like a catch 20. Is a catch 20. So it's not like a uh, one size fits all. You have to have different factors driving different economies because the economic factors are constantly changing. But yes, the involvement of top leadership in matters that are of strategic importance have been an important factor, and I see that evolving in even more going forward.
That's a very positive sign, don't you think so? And at the end of the day, I see light at the end of a tunnel. Do you agree with with
Oh yes,
my sense of
yes,
perception?
yes, yes. So there's definitely light at the end of the tunnel, and it's primarily emanating. See, India has been a democracy and a very stable economic player in this part of the world for a number of years. So that role hasn't changed as such. But what has changed is the Middle Eastern perspective of looking. Don't forget this also coincides with the region's look east policy. Again, this is not a collective policy, but generally they are kind of looking at east because their energy supplies are mostly going towards the east, and the west, after their own issues, primarily the United States getting their own energy independence, they don't look at the Middle East as they used to. So there's been during the Obama administration a very well canvassed look east, gravitation towards east. Again, there are people who kind of contest that, but there has been a decisive reluctance on the part of the Americans to engage in this part of the world, and there are various examples of that. But that said, this the way you look at Russia's greater involvement in conflicts with Syria and even Libya, that kind of suggests that the receding, the withdrawing American footprint in the region is being filled up by Syria to an extent. China is also a player, but it's more on the economic front than the military and the security side of things. So there is also a flux if you look at the entire picture, which makes it very interesting for India to engage, which makes it important for India to engage in this part of the world more intensely than it used to earlier.
Iran has come up in a big way with regards to technology and digital, skill set management, and the bilateral relations between the two have literally got a new curve escalation. Do you foresee any change in that?
Well, Iran is an interesting case study, and it is almost opposed to what the GCC stands for. So, and India so far has managed to strike a balance between how it deals with Iran and how it deals with the rest of the GCC countries. So, the success of diplomacy in these situations is how you keep both on board and your national interests alive in both the regions. India has done a reasonably good job with that. But again, it cannot ignore the fact that Iran is seen by the Gulf countries as a destabilizing factor, and it has its presence in remote presence, if I may call it that, in conflicts such as Yemen and Lebanon and even Iraq. So these are factors that are at play. So, but since India has nothing to do with those conflicts as such, what is in India's interest is to continue engage with Iran at one level and the GCC countries at another, and basically give them both a sense of camaraderie and a sense of mutual interdependence, which helps both sides.
Now, I give you a small case study. India has always been a dependent nation with regards to the energy resource management, on the Middle East, and for the oil exploration programs. Now, how do you think that the non-conventional energy sources can be of use, especially with the upsurgence of the electric vehicles and the electric, being used as an alternative source of energy management?
Then if you look at the numbers, it's still a very small component of the energy mix. The conventional fossil fuel is still, if I'm not mistaken, around 80% of the component. So the renewables and other more greener energy options are definitely making their mark and are getting the investment and the attention that they deserve, and will probably be the important part of policy evolution going forward. But it will be a mistake to wish away fossil fuel as if the oil is not going to be there in say 10, 20, 50, 30 years time. Maybe in 50 years time it will start to be. It will not be as much as relevant. But again, at the moment, you also have to, when you're looking at oil, you also have to look at the cost of production and things like that. So if the cost of production of a renewable energy, the enough economies of scale don't work out for countries, so there is no point to putting more money into something that gives you less energy compared to a fossil fuel energy driven energy, which gives you very efficient energy resource at like half the cost. So those equations will continue to change going forward, but I don't think the transition is happening as rapidly as a lot of people are making out to be. But don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting that there should not be a thrust towards sustainable energy. There should definitely be, and most of the oil producing countries themselves are investing heavily on renewable resources and renewable energy. But then till the time it becomes a really good alternative, then the world will continue to rely on fossil oil, which is fossil fuel, which is oil.
There's a tremendous, emphasis also on the way the geopolitical canvas is changing. I mean, we on one side we have BRICS, on the other side, China is playing the double cross game presently in the Indian Ocean, and there is the joint operations in the naval force between India and US doing exercises somewhere in Uttarakhand. Do you see China as a potent and cogent player with regards to defense and potent threat to Indian national security on the shores, especially in the Indian Ocean region?
Oh yes, definitely. I mean, China is one factor that India can't ignore on all fronts. So it goes without saying that it's a security challenge. It's also an economic challenge. It's also a strategic challenge. But then that has been going on for a while. So it's not something that India finds itself confronted with as of now. There are policymakers 30, 40, 50 years from now would have looked at China's progress and how it impacts India's neighborhood and things like that. In this part of the world, China's very rapid economic advances have made a lot of countries dependent on them. Again, culturally, the Arab countries may be more aligned with India, but they have invested heavily in their relations with China. So these things keep changing, and they need to be looked at from a much longer, broader perspective than just a few exercises here and there. Because now with Ukraine and multipolarity becoming the order of the day, more and more countries are beginning to think that they cannot continue to remain a rentier state from the United States, especially if they are not willing to provide the security that they used to in the post-Cold War era. So things have changed, and things will change, and each country will look at the prism with their own national interests in mind, and evolve their strategy. What I see most countries doing now, especially with something like the Abraham Accords that happened a couple of years ago, bringing in Israel into a very Arab region, that has opened up possibilities for a lot of other countries to look at the world differently. So they don't see it as, we've had a conference recently on which the US, China, tussle at various levels were discussed, and none of those arguments evolved around how the US and China are going to battle it out or who is going to emerge winner. They were all discussing how it's going to impact countries in this region. So, end of the day, you have to look at the pros and cons of geostrategic shifts globally, and but you have to look at how it impacts you locally. So local is the term to go, and applying global perspectives on local policy making is what is going to drive things forward.
That's a beautiful point that you've raised. Our Honorable Prime Minister Sri Narendra Modi lays emphasis on vocal for local, and we are looking at indigenization of our technology, our product, and the Made in India, Made by India trigger point is literally working overtime. How do you look at this particular new agenda of India First mandate from the Gulf perspective?
It's sooner. I mean, better late than never. Never is what comes to mind straight away. This should have been done 20, 30 years ago. But again, the world that was 20 years ago doesn't exist anymore. So there is an element of anticipation and all that. But I mean, better late than never. And it will evolve into more sector specific. Technology driven. India is a leader in technology, so we can take it for granted that it will always be taken as a leader in technology. But how it translates that technology into more community driven systems and processes that benefit smaller countries with their own set of requirements, that is going to be, so basically customizing technology for the use of countries with their own unique resources. Those sorts of fine tuning is what probably would be required. I think the big picture is clear that India is ready to provide. I mean, I was talking to the Minister of Technology, Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekhar, and he was telling me about the semiconductors and how the landscape has changed in India in terms of semiconductors. And semiconductors is probably going to be the next big battle between. It is already a big battle between US and China, but even for countries like India and others in the region, it will be UAE has invested a lot in semiconductors. So those kind of things would become more relevant than just IT outsourcing and things like that, because technology, as we all know, is very rapidly evolving. And to anticipate what is going to happen in the next 10 years, now the whole world is talking about artificial intelligence, but who knows, in 10 years time we might have moved away ahead of artificial intelligence, even though probably half the world doesn't even know what this is today. So when we say technology, we have to kind of assume that it is something that is changing very rapidly, and how rapidly we change with it will define how successful we are going forward.
Well, you have seen the best of both the worlds. I give you another case study. Because you have represented the Trends magazine as a business editor at the World Economic Forum. You have seen different leaders parroting different narrative with regards to economics, whereas there is undoubtedly, undeniably, the economics nailed down, creeping in the entire world order. Resultantly, what is happening? There is enormous, humongous recession. The big giants are closing down their shutters. The layoff slips are hanging like paper collars. And at the end of the day, there is an element of insecurity, uncertainty amongst the European and the NATO nations, especially in the wake of the Russian-Ukraine war. How do you see, as an Indian journalist based out of Gulf region?
Opportunity. All I see is opportunity. Of course, these are tough times, and probably it will get tougher before it gets better. But that also gives the opportunity to fundamentally transform the way we approach things. even on the economic front. I remember interviewing a Columbia University vice chancellor at the World Economic Forum, and this was the aftermath of 2008 financial crisis. And he was very interestingly whiling away his time reading newspapers while the head honchos of the top corporate bodies were engaged in discussions. So I walked up to him and I said, I want to interview you, and your very leisurely approach is kind of intriguing me. And he gave a very candid explanation of that. He said, when the world is in trouble, and as an academic or as a scientist, what you do is you go back to the drawing room and see where we've gone wrong. And my problem with the business world today is they're not going back to the drawing board to see what has gone wrong. So that brings me to a very important subject today, which is data. Now, data is the new gold, it's the new oil, or whatever you may call it. You can look at it from the perspective of a resource that can be used for better planning and management. But it is at the core of what a lot of these countries can do, and it's going to define how efficient systems you develop as in the wake of very difficult circumstances that exist. And I see the way forward by by making greater use of data and enhancing performances of corporations, even governance models and things like that. If there are challenges, there are also opportunities in the way technology presents itself in many ways. So if we are wasting a lot of money and resources on products and services that are not efficient, in today's day and age, we can have data that can fulfill those requirements, can make systems efficient. So, just going back to the argument of how to fix economies, it is meant for the various policymakers around the world to figure out. And again, every country has its own recipe for different situations, and there cannot be one size fits all solution. But reliance on the latest technology and using data as a tool would probably present as a method through which some of these challenges can be overcome.
I'm getting an online question from Assam. My listener wants to know that you have been an academician. What are the avenues open for students who are willing to pursue their advanced studies either in IT or in the AI or in the emerging technologies out there in the Middle East, so that this perspective gets expanded both horizontally and vertically?
A very interesting question. Actually, there is a lot of amalgamation happening. So in this part of the world, we see universities from the east and the west coming in and setting up their campuses here. And when I mean here, there are in the UAE, you have around 200 nationalities living. So we live in a truly global world. And when you come to a place like the UAE, you get overwhelmed because you have people from all over the world. So it kind of becomes difficult to figure out which students to attract and where to get your professors from. But if I see the synergies that are developing in the education system, education sector, it's very exciting to see professors from all over the world coming in and teaching students from all over the world. And that probably can happen only in the Middle East, in the Gulf region as of now, because this is where that the convergence is happening at probably the fastest pace. I'm not denying the fact that people still travel to the US and Europe and elsewhere for their higher studies. But again, if you look at the means and if you look at the resources of a lot of third world countries, especially in Asia, they may not all of them may have the means to travel that far. So for them, the median option is coming to the Gulf and benefiting from these courses that are being offered. So to cut a long story short, there are a lot of educators flying into the Middle East to pursue to advance their know-how and understanding of subjects. So it is also time for students to fly in and benefit from them.
As I come to the end of the podcast, I am very intrigued to understand that what are the prospects for tourism industry, uh, oil and natural gas, meat and marine products, exports which are there on the uprising, uh, especially, and how do you foresee the paradigm shift in the bilateral relation between India and Gulf region, especially in the present parlance?
Okay, so let me start with tourism. Now, you already have a tourism destination such as Dubai, which attracts the biggest and the brightest and the tallest and the highest, or whatever you may call it, and that has been the model, and that has always already been a very attractive proposition for a lot of people from India. Also, probably because there is a very big Indian diaspora here. So when we have the best part of the year, which is happening now, the December, January, so you have a lot of friends and family descending into the UAE and benefiting from the tourism products that they have. It. But there is also the the very exotic tourism in places like Jordan. Now with Israel coming up, that's another. I mean, with slightly less conflict, it will be a good place to visit to look at the birthplace of three Abrahamic religions. And Saudi Arabia is opening up in a big way, trying to develop products that would attract. You already have a lot of people coming in for the Hajj and Umrah, the religious tourism that happens in certain parts of the year. So there are opportunities galore. I mean, it depends on how interested you are in the Middle East as such. But if you choose to take interest, there are opportunities to fulfill those inquisitiveness, if I may call it so. So that's one. But outside of that, as you said, you enumerated a number of sectors. It'll be difficult for me to go through them all in one basket, but a lot of exports have happened and they have opened up. There are lots of export opportunities still to be fulfilled. Food security is a very big challenge for this part of the world, so there'll always be an opening to fill in that food basket, because most of the Gulf countries are still importing food. And it's an arid land, so the opportunity to grow food in this part of the world is still very basic. So those are areas that would continue to flourish. I missed the other two, three.
I said oil, OPEC, oil and
yes.
OPEC
Yes,
countries.
oil. Yes, oil. So oil will continue to be a part of a big mix of energy interdependence. India still relies on oil, and I mean it gets oil from different parts of the world, but still the biggest chunk happens to be from this part of the world. So I don't see that disappearing anytime soon. And now the good thing between the India GCC, India UAE relations is the more strategic depth related to oil. So there has been more focus on expanding the industrial base in in cooperation with these countries. And you have the strategic oil reserves that has been signed with the UAE, and also investment into oil industry, and not just the import of fossil fuel. So lots of things are happening at different levels, and I only see them expanding rapidly going forward. To just put all that into perspective, you still have the carbon versus fuel debate happening all over the world. So, but there is also a lot of focus on circular economy and things like sustainability.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the mix, there has to be the right mix of all these projects and sectors going into, and then there'll have to be a little bit of give and take as we proceed down this line, because some sectors will lose importance, but the others will gain. But India will continue to remain engaged in this part of the world and should continue to do so.
Excellent, Etesham. Your viewpoint matters at the Viewpoint podcast. Thanks very much for sharing your perspective in the present scenario on the geopolitical issues, on issues of national and international interest, and especially related to Gulf region, how we can expand a golden handshake to improve our bilateral and multilateral relationship for the interest and welfare of both the nations. Thanks very much, Etesham Shahid, for giving me your time. You have been a prolific writer, an orator, a think tank, and we respect your in-depth knowledge and words of wisdom on the various subjects. You've been a proud
Thank you.
Indian, and we salute you and your expertise, especially as we celebrate Anand Kal in the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. Thank you very much for your time, Etesham. It's been a pleasure. It's been a real pleasure, and I hope you've enjoyed. Your concluding remark.
Thank you very much. It was lovely talking to you, and good luck with all your new ventures. Take care.
Dear listeners, this was Etesham Shahid, who's been my guest at the Viewpoint podcast. We'll come again with new fragrance, new flavor, new celebrity, and a new subject. But international affairs has been always on my mind, especially in the present context. Till then, stay tuned, stay safe. Bye for now.